We'll start.
Can I ask something
Sure.
about the meditation of today?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. I chose as my object the sensation of breathing because I wanted to work a little bit of concentration without tense.
Without
Without tense.
tense, yeah.
So when the meditation went on, and my breath was much more
Calm.
I stopped feeling the air in the nose and began to feel such another sensation around the mouth here. So is it not enough clarity or more clarity? What is going on?
As we, is this working? Yeah. As we get into this practice, I mean, initially, often when people start here, they more or less notice nothing or hardly anything because it's a very small area and their clarity is not very good. But then, if we pay close attention, we start to notice sensations here. And as we become more relaxed, stable and clear, the mind calms down, which means the breathing gets more and more subtle, which means the amount of volume, amount of air moving here gets less and less and less. So sensations get more and more subtle. And then, of course, in between the in and out breath, or the out and in breath, there's a little gap where you're not breathing. But there's still sensations here. So what you'll notice is when you really start to improve clarity, even between the in and out breath, you'll notice sensations here. You'll note a lot of sensations here. So I think this seems like what's happening to you is that the breathing is really, I mean, even to the point where sometimes you wonder, am I breathing? Because the volume is so small. And then, of course, there's hardly any air moving here, but there's, because of the clarity, you're picking up all the sensations that are always here. So that's good. Good.
I wonder where is everyone's attention when we concentrate on the mind. Where is that tension?
Where?
Physically, like where?
We're going to ask that question on day 9.
The tension, because if it's here, it's make me stress. If it's here, it's good. If it's here, it's... You did the practice when the awareness going to the right and up.
Sure. And we may do that tomorrow if we get a chance.
I just wonder how is it in every, like...
Well, we're going to have a look. This is one of the questions we're going to be asking day after tomorrow. But one thing that we can think about is, you know, this view of emptiness that we're going to look at. You know, normally, certainly in scientific materialism, the worldview is that everything in the universe is matter and energy. And the mind either is the brain, a function of the brain, emergent property of the brain, or it just doesn't exist. That's it. So therefore everything in that worldview has spatial location. And so therefore in that worldview, matter and energy are fundamental. And if mind exists, it's sort of some secondary thing that's a byproduct, like as a property or a function or something. That's the view. Buddhism is sort of the opposite, is that the mind is primary and the material world is secondary. And if that's true, if the physical world is coming from the mind, then how is the source having a location in that which it produces? If the mind is producing the physical world, that's the source of the physical world, then how can we ask the question, where is mind located in that thing that it's creating? It doesn't really make any sense, does it? Does it?
No, I understand.
But anyway, we're going to...
The mind is kind of energy.
Not as
The
an
material
energy.
is energy.
It's not material. It's not material. I mean, you
And
can
energy
use...
is material.
Sorry?
Energy, it's a material.
It's matter.
It's a source.
Yeah, huh? It's physical. Yeah, there's physical is matter and energy. They're the two physical things.
What do you call when there are two magnets?
Magnetic energy.
Magnetic energy, that
It's
they are
physical.
Not, they're not coming together.
Yeah,
You
it's
can't
physical.
mute it.
The polarities.
Yeah, it's physical.
It's still physical.
Okay.
But we're going to look. This is one of the questions we're going to ask on day 9. Where's the mind? And we'll see what we can see.
The meditation of awareness, we have to choose the space, also the space, or the awareness of the space, awareness of the movement, when we choose.
Resting in awareness, the practice of resting in awareness.
Resting in awareness.
The practice, yeah, and then the question is?
So if I have to choose learning in awareness in space or in movement, to choose one of them.
Sorry, you lost me. So you want to do the practice of resting in awareness?
Yeah, this was.
So in that practice, we're not interested in any appearances.
Yeah, but we, in our class, we concentrated on space, on movement.
Yeah, but that's not resting in awareness.
So
That's called stillness in motion. So that's combining resting in awareness with observing the mind, putting them together.
No, you say awareness with the motion.
Stillness in motion, yeah. That's combining those two practices we did. So the one practice we did after the breath was just observing thoughts. And of course the space of the mind that those thoughts arise in. So that's one practice. The next,
What's the name?
that's just called observing the mind. Alan Wallace calls it settling the mind in its natural state, but it's just using the mind as the object of shamatha. The next day we did what's called shamatha with no object. And that's just resting in awareness, knowing you're aware. Then the following day we joined those two together, called stillness in motion.
Is there any difference or correlation between counting your breath in order to quieten the mind and repeating mantras like in Hinduism?
Right. So remember, counting the breath is simply a short-term strategy that we add to the practice to help us to stay a little bit more focused. So it's not part of the actual practice.
No, I mean concentrating on the breath, not counting.
Oh, concentrating on the breath versus
repeating mantras.
Right. Good question. Sometimes in the meditation text, in this shamatha text, it lists a number of different options of objects you can use, and sometimes it says something like, oh, you can't even focus on the breath? Okay. Find a physical object like a stick or a pebble, put it down and look at it. A visual object. And that can sort of help us to get into the practice a little bit, but a visual object won't take us very far because it's too coarse. So then they say, okay, start there, look at the object, and once you've got somewhere, then look at the mental image of that object. Shift to the mental image instead of the visual. So similarly, you could chant a mantra or something to get into the practice, but because it's a sensory object, it won't take you very far. It'll get you into the practice, but if you really want to develop shamatha, chanting mantra, looking at an object, they're a bit limited in how far they'll take you. Of course, chanting mantra we also find in Tibetan Buddhism a lot, but there chanting mantra has a different purpose than shamatha.
And what is it in Buddhism?
That's together in what's called generation stage practice, where you're doing a sadhana practice, where you're doing a lot of visualization. And to do that practice effectively, we have to be doing it from the enlightened state. Meaning, we have to really have an appreciation and realization of emptiness. Because otherwise, when we're doing this, and we're in the form of like a deity, but if we don't have realization of emptiness, then often what people do in their sadhana practice, they go, okay, now I'm pretending to be Tara. Now I'm pretending to be Chenrezig. Now I'm pretending to be Manjushri. This is not the practice. This is grasping. This is changing, grasping onto this as me to grasping onto that as me. That is not sadhana practice. Because in the sadhana, one of the very first things you see is it says, dissolve everything into emptiness and arise out of emptiness. If we don't do that, we're just fooling ourselves. We're just now becoming, the ego is grabbing hold of Chenrezig as me. And then we become very arrogant, thinking we're special. So this is not sadhana practice. So to do the visualization, to chant the mantra and all that, to do it properly, we need to be doing it from emptiness. Otherwise, it's just a bit of a sort of a game. It doesn't really have much impact. It could have the impact of boosting the ego if we're doing it grasping. So, so therefore chanting mantra, visualization, all that, to really, for it to have an impact, it needs to be coming out of this emptiness.
Okay. Just to continue, but a lot of people do sadhanas without.
Right.
It's very, very common.
I know, and I have a number of friends who did it for 10, 15, 20 years and nothing changed. Nothing changed. Because it's not effective. So all the meditation texts say, if you want to practice sadhana, you need three things. You need renunciation, you need bodhicitta, and you need the wisdom of emptiness. Do we have to have them fully realized? No. But if we don't have some little experience of them, I think that doing sadhana practice is not the most effective use of time. Maybe better to spend your time developing these, then do sadhana practice. Then it's very powerful. And I have friends, because from the 70s and 80s, because all the Tibetans were doing that, so they all did it because all the Tibetans were. And then, 10, 20 years later, they're still chanting their mantra and doing their sadhana practice, and they haven't changed. They haven't changed because they have no effective basis for it. So I'm not suggesting we abandon sadhana practice if we're doing it, but all I'm suggesting is if you really want it to make it work, then you need to put time and energy into shamatha, vipassana, and then, of course, the bodhicitta. Put effort into those while you're doing your sadhana practice, and then slowly your sadhana practice will get very powerful. Very powerful.
I have a question about the effort, generally. It feels almost impossible in the city life today with day jobs to go even close to these aspirations which are beautiful.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about this tomorrow afternoon in these what's called the preconditions. But two brief things, and we'll talk more tomorrow. One is, as I think I already mentioned, if we find ourselves in conditions that are not conducive, not good, and then we put effort, we actually get more benefit because it's a bit difficult. It's the same as everything in life. If we're doing things and it's easy, okay, that's good. But if we're doing the same thing and it's more difficult, then we progress more. The second one is that, of course, in the Mahayana, we're not only doing for self, we're doing for others. So actually being in an environment, interacting with others can be very helpful for a lot of the Mahayana practices. So whereas in the Theravada it's more like moving out of that into more solitary space and just working on yourself, because anyway, there's a lot to say about that, but that's more the emphasis there. Whereas in the Mahayana, it's really, of course we need to meditate, but we need to also work with others, because it's the bodhicitta motivation which turbocharges everything we do. And so therefore we shouldn't think, I'm in a society, I can't follow spiritual path. But of course, there are certain things we need to do within that to make it possible, and that's what we're going to look at tomorrow afternoon.
Regarding the materialistic
worldview,
that you mentioned, like the mind is a byproduct of the.
Well, there's a number of assertions, but basically,
but this specific one, like, is there like a logical reasoning why it's not true?
Why it's not true is because they've in 40, 50 years of research, they've not found any causal link. Because the thing is, they've started with an assumption, it's just an assumption, that everything in the known universe is matter and energy. That's the starting assumption. And then along comes mind, and they go, ooh, okay, it's an emergent property of that. But they've never proven that. And actually, emergent properties exist, Emergent property of water is wetness and so forth. But everywhere else in the universe, the emergent property of something physical is always physical. Everywhere else. Except mind. The one exception. Because actually, if you look in your mind at thoughts and emotions, do you see any physical characteristics at all in thoughts and emotions? There are none. So doesn't it seem a bit odd that everywhere else in the universe, all emergent properties are always physical, except here, where they say, well, actually now we have an emergent property that's not physical, it's called the mind. Doesn't that seem a bit odd?
It's based on a very narrow knowledge we have on the world. But
right, but what I'm saying is that they've tried to sort of fit this into that worldview, and they've been, for many years, trying to find the link, and so far have been unsuccessful. In fact, there's a cognitive scientist who I really like, Donald Hoffman, and he also has been for many years trying to find how mind comes from brain activity and so forth, unsuccessfully. But now he has flipped around, and instead of seeing how mind comes out of brain, he's now trying to see or show how, in fact he's trying to show how quantum theory, quantum mechanics comes out of mind. That's his basis he's working at now. Of course, he hasn't proven anything, but that's now what he's trying to do, because he through his research and so forth, he basically is now with the assumption that the mind is primary and the physical world comes out of that. And now he's trying to show that. He's working together with some mathematicians to try to prove that, mathematically at least. But interesting.
And how come, if it's true, our minds produce similar realities? Like we all have the same prime minister, the same president,
It's causality. It's just causality.
What do you mean by that?
Causality is because our experiences are the result of our actions, and we all have similar actions, and so we have similar experiences. And of course, therefore, similar sense faculties and all of that.
Similar minds also?
In that sense, yeah. I mean, depends what you mean by similar minds, but yeah, sure.
Do you think that language, a nice language, effective language, decent language,
What sort of language? What was the last one?
excellent language,
Excellent language, yeah.
yeah, it's open the mind?
What's excellent? What do you mean by excellent language?
Nice talking, not to accuse somebody.
Oh, does it help? Of course. I mean,
It's open the mind?
of course. I mean, of course. Of course, speaking well. I mean, speaking in a positive way is helpful. Of course. Why not?
There's some studies with people who've had the two hemispheres of their brains split because
Sure.
of epilepsy or
Sure.
something like that.
Sure.
And the research shows that they actually develop the right side of the brain has a sense of self and the left side of the brain has a sense of self. And the two often oppose each other. They're not,
Sure.
the person doesn't identify as the same person. You know,
Sure.
if you ask the left side of the brain what they want to be when they grow up and the right side, they have different answers.
Sure.
So how does the concept of the mind or consciousness in Buddhism fit with something that's that physical?
Oh, because the mind and brain are very close relationship. You damage the brain or affect the brain, you affect the mind. No problem.
But with consciousness, the assumption is that we're all kind of tapping into the same space. We don't really have a sense of self. So how can someone have two senses? Like if
Yeah, we have a
someone's gonna
sense. Of course, we have a sense of self.
but we have one sense of self. We don't have
What do you
two.
mean? Oh no, we change our sense of self like that all day long.
No, but the person who's identifying, recognizing your desires, recognizing, like when we observe our thoughts, the person doing the observing doesn't
Right.
change.
Well, it changes all the time. Every single moment it's changing. Never stays the same. And one moment we might be thinking I'm an angry person, and then
That's
we're
the content of what you're thinking, but the sense of that I am doing the thinking, that sense of self doesn't change. Like you can talk to people who've had strokes, they still feel like they're the same person, even though their personality is different. But this is an
Right.
example where somebody has a very different sense of self in two sides of they feel like two different people,
right. And then we can have schizophrenia where you feel two.
but they feel like the same person. The content of it, no, but they do. So if you look at what schizophrenics feel, schizophrenics
Right.
have different inputs, but their sense of self is the same.
Right.
They're getting very different information from the
So
world.
the
than
question
normal
is,
people. How does Buddhism explain that you can have two different senses of self that is observing the world in one person?
because the sense of self can change all the time. I'm not sure I understand the question.
When we're doing the meditation, we're observing from a space where we're kind of in awareness.
Right.
And that awareness is, you only really have one space of awareness, one space of stillness.
Right. Yeah, I'm missing something in the question.
It's like
Right.
His Holiness Dalai Lama has this, איך אומרים אלה שמנבאים את העתידות? אורקלס?
That's what?
The oracle of...
Oracle. Yeah.
So they have some entities that mean to them.
Well, they're connecting with another being, yeah.
It's actually connected with them,
Okay.
really physically, you can
Mhm.
see it. And
Sure.
Also in the Tibetan stories, like
Right.
in Tibet, lamas used to go to houses where the people obsessed with someone getting into it.
Right.
So this might be the case. They have someone, they have, they have. We call it in Hebrew, we call it the book. In Jewish also it is the book. That you have two entities.
Yeah, but I mean, in this case where you have the two hemispheres and so forth, of course, the mind that we have now is supported on this brain. So if you do something to the brain, You could in one moment have a completely different sense of self, and another moment a completely different sense of self. So, but I mean, you're saying that there's like, people have two senses of self. Yeah, good. I mean, not good, but I mean, the question is, where is that sense of self arising? In the mind, isn't it?
But that implies that it's divisible.
What's divisible?
The sense of self, that it's divisible. You can break it up into parts. And I think for most people, at least for me, it's very unusual to think of my sense of self as being able to be split up. So consciousness, in some ways, is divisible.
But isn't the sense of self just based on many things, a collection of many things?
But I think we're getting into a terminology thing. The sense of self that I'm talking about is not the contents of the self. So it's not your memories,
Right.
it's not your thoughts.
But that,
it's not
what
your-
I'm saying is, where does that sense of self appear or arise? In the
No,
mind.
but that's the whole point. Is that if you can have two senses of self, the
Right.
source of them is still the mystery, and that's what I'm asking. It's like how can one person have two senses of self, have two capacities to observe contents that are, it's the sense, it's not the contents of their thoughts
Right.
that are interesting.
Right, but that two senses of self is coming within one body. So, two senses of self is coming within one mind. I don't see the...
But why does one body equal one mind? What's like? For me, the terminology of self-consciousness and mind is getting confusing.
I think the observer that you're talking about, it's not from the self,
But there's
sense
like-
of self. It's from them. It's
There's
it's an
only...
it's only one observer.
There's
Yeah,
one
that's
mind, there's only
One
one
mind.
mind with one body.
But that's you just answered the question. So in Buddhism, there is an assumption that there is only one mind with one body.
Yeah, that's what we were taught in the 12 links there. The mind comes together with the body.
So
The,
then
the
how
vehicle,
does
the
that-
body is the support for the mind.
Even he has two brains.
So then how does that explain someone who's dealing with a situation where they have two senses, two minds, what feels like two minds in the same body?
Because the brain is not functioning properly.
Maybe you should talk about this.
I mean, you don't even need, you can have, I still not understand the question.
I think she said one thing that I think, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, there's an assumption, she's saying there's an assumption that there's one eye permanent behind that's watching everything.
There's one what?
A permanent eye, like a permanent self that's watching everything that's moving. And she's asking,
According to neuroscience?
no, I
Oh.
think the way
According to
she presented, what's her name?
Hannah.
Hannah, sorry. Hannah's saying there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's like a sense of a permanent eye behind watching everything. And she's saying if there's this assumption that there's one thing watching behind, how can it become two? But in Buddhism, this assumption is incorrect.
Yeah, there's nothing you can point to that says that's the self. The self is a concept that we create based on experience. So we can have two different different experiences and have self and have person. I'm missing something anyway. Maybe that'll come clear on day 9. We can come back to it. Okay, let's go to this evening's topic now. I want to finish this chart here. So this is the standard model that we often see presented in terms of the stages of progress in the Shamatha practice. It's a 9-stage model. And yesterday we looked at